like to make a call, please hang up and try again.
Ezra McCandless drove out on a remote road in Wisconsin with her ex-boyfriend Alex Woodworth. Late that same afternoon, Ezra turned up on the doorstep of a local dairy farmer, claiming that she'd been assaulted. Ezra is charged with first-degree intentional homicide for stabbing Alex 16 times in the head, neck, torso, and groin.
Samantha Kobs, Samantha Kobs.
And what is your occupation?
I'm a high school English teacher.
And did you know a man named Alex Woodworth?
Yes.
When did you first know him?
I started working at a coffee shop in November of 2013, and he was a regular customer, so probably shortly after that.
And is this coffee shop Racy's?
Yeah, Racy D'lene's.
And so did you become friends with Alex?
Yes, as a customer first. So he was there a lot, oftentimes for hours. And you just get to know the regular customers fairly well. And eventually we became friends, and he started working there at one point.
So in November of 2017, did you learn that Alex was involved in a relationship?
Yes.
And did you learn who that relationship was with?
Yes.
And who was it with?
Ezra McCandless.
And were you familiar with the defendant?
Yes.
How did you know her?
She also would come into the coffee shop.
Do you know when you got to know her?
It was probably the summer before that, November, so maybe just a few months before that.
Okay, summer of 2017?
Yes. And actually, simultaneously, I'd received a message from Ezra on Facebook asking if she could come and look at the apartment because I'd made a public post saying that I had a room to fill. So when I was texting Alex about the apartment, I also told him that Ezra had reached out and was showing interest as well. Up to that time, I didn't know that anything had happened between them, but he asked if I could not mention him because they'd had a falling out the day before, which would have been February 24th.
Did you also learn that there was a potential sexual assault investigation pertaining to the defendant and John Hansen?
Yes.
No foundation. No rule. I think this sounds like a foundational question.
Were you aware that the defendant and John Hansen had some sort of relations?
Objection, no foundation. This witness does not have a foundation to testify.
Well,
Her awareness is not based upon personal knowledge. It is based upon gossip or hearsay.
all right. Well, I guess let's start that way. Let's go back. Foundation, any person.
And I can move on. Did you ask Alex something about the defendant and her relationship with John Hansen?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
That's her statement. So what did you say to Alex regarding a sexual assault investigation?
Objection.
What did you say to Alex without any background or explanation? What did you say to him?
I said, do you think she's going to also accuse you of sexual assault?
And how was Alex's demeanor when you made that statement?
He said he didn't know, but he wasn't worried about it because he had months worth of text messages to prove that it was a consensual relationship.
It's Kristopher, Kristopher, last name's O'Neill, O''Neill.
And how are you employed, sir?
I'm a police officer of the city of Eau Claire.
How long have you been employed with the city of Eau Claire?
22 and a half years. I'm currently assigned to the patrol division as a road patrol officer.
And did you have that same assignment on March 22nd of 2018?
Yes, I did.
Were you working on that day?
Yes, I was.
And were you dispatched at some point in time that day shortly after the lunch hour for any incidents?
Yes, I was sent to a welfare check person case.
If you recall.
I don't know the exact time, but it was shortly after noon.
All right. And when you arrived at the scene, who's the first person that you had contact with?
A gentleman by the name of Jason Mengel.
And do you recall where you met with Mr. Mengel when you initially saw him?
As I was pulling up to the location, he was walking northbound across Cameron Street towards the Montessori School.
After you had some discussion with Mr. Mengel, where did you go?
Then I went across the street and met with two other individuals that had exited the house at 511 Cameron Street.
All right. And where were those individuals when you first saw them?
They had been walking out of the house.
Did they walk out at the same time?
I believe so.
All right. And did you eventually identify who those two individuals were?
I did.
And who were they?
An Alex Woodworth and an Ezra McCandless.
All right. Did you discuss with Mr. Woodworth how things were, if there were any problems?
I asked both subjects if everything was okay, and he told me that they were.
All right. And did you also ask the defendant if everything was okay?
I did.
And what was her response?
She said that everything was okay as well.
All right. Did she express to you when you were talking to her any concerns with being with Alex Woodworth?
No.
Do you know that person that lives there?
It's my girlfriend's car, or my
Okay.
ex-girlfriend. We're kind of in a situation, and when she talked to me this morning, I was worried because the guy that lives there is involved in an assault case that she's with, or
I mean, she's the victim of?
she's the victim of an assault that happened, and when she went to him for consolement, I was gone on military orders.
Okay.
She went to him to talk to him about stuff, and then he kind of took advantage of her too, and she wanted to talk to him, I think today, about some stuff, and I was paranoid because she had fucking, like, fire in her eyes.
Okay.
So,
Who's the girlfriend?
Ezra McCandless. I don't think he's dangerous, but I don't know.
Do you know what his name is?
Alex Woodworth?
Okay.
Or I think it's Woodsworth or Woodsworth.
Only 108 headquarters, 1029. Stand by one.
Hi. Is everything okay here?
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody called us kind of worried because they saw Jason come over here and he was going in the car and they weren't sure what was going on.
No. Everything's fine.
Everything's fine? Okay. Do you guys have any ID with you? Just
Yeah.
I got to write a report here that I came over and talked with you guys.
Officer O'Neill, after reviewing that, during the course of your contact with the defendant, did she ever indicate or tell you that she had a concern about being with Alex Woodworth?
No.
And where do you live, Mr. Sipple?
Menominee on the farm.
And is that residence located in Springbrook Township?
That's correct.
And that's in Dunn County, Wisconsin?
Yes. It was about 4:15, 4:20 in the afternoon, and I was just about ready to sit down, and I saw this young lady go by the windows. She, after I went to the door, which is another door from the main entry, and opened the door, and she looked at me and asked me to take her to the hospital.
And how did you respond?
It took me off guard. I didn't quite know what to do at that time. But a little bit later, she said she was attacked. And at that time, then I thought I kind of got my senses together, and I decided I'd call 911.
Okay. And is she injured?
Yeah, she's injured. Her mouth is kind of got some blood around it, and her clothes are all torn.
Okay. And she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently. But it's a young lady that's here that needs help
Yep.
Pretty quick.
Yep, I have an ambulance and some officers started that way. Did she say who did this to her?
Did she what?
Did she say who did this to her?
No, she said she was attacked, assaulted, and she's from Eau Claire.
16, 22, 35 seconds.
Yep.
She don't have any shoes on.
Okay.
Hands are all muddied.
Okay.
I think she's probably walked quite a ways. I don't know without shoes how far she came, but...
Right. Okay. And is she outside of your residence, or where is she?
No, she's in. I got her inside.
She's inside, okay.
Yep. She's shivering, she's cold, so you had a good idea that I should have thought of getting a blanket around her to keep her warm, but I got her sitting on a chair.
Okay, sounds good. I'll keep you on the phone here.
My name is Robert Tillotson, and the spelling of my last name is Tillotson.
How are you employed, sir?
I'm an emergency physician with Mayo Clinic.
How long have you been employed as an emergency physician with Mayo Clinic?
About 2.5 years.
And doctor, prior to that, do you have experience working as an emergency room physician?
For about 30 years.
In your work in the emergency rooms over the last 30 years, have you seen wounds of various types?
Pretty much every day I work, I see a wound of some type or another.
And as part of that, have you had occasion to see sharp force or knife wounds?
Yes.
Is that something you see on a regular basis?
Fairly commonly, yes.
And have you seen knife wounds or sharp force injuries that have been self-inflicted?
Yes.
All right.
We see a lot of self-inflicted wounds, and especially it's become more common for people to actually do cutting on themselves as a coping mechanism. So as I've been in practice over 30 years, the number of injuries have increased that are self-inflicted, so we see them much more commonly. Both when I was in Stevens Point and now at Mayo, we work in the Regional Psychiatric Center. We have a psychiatric inpatient hospital, so we end up seeing a lot of patients with attempted suicide and with cutting and depression. So we see a lot of self-inflicted wounds of various types, from actually attempted suicides to just cutting for stress relief.
When you see an inflicted wound versus a self-inflicted wound for coping or something like that, are there differences typically between those types of injuries, what you see?
Differences in what are you referring to?
Well, as far as the severity of those injuries.
They tend to, if they're just for coping, they tend to be fairly superficial, patterned, repetitive. You'll see multiple wounds in the same area, and usually within the reach of their dominant hand, because that's what they typically do. We'll see things like words carved into extremities, like I encountered with my patient in this instances, or they'll also be in areas where they have pain or problems. A classic example is I had one person who had an amputation of his leg and he was very distressed about it, so he stabbed himself with a screwdriver in the amputation. So they tend to be very patterned and specific, following where their stress is frequently.
Damage to the hand as a result of grabbing that knife, the sharp end of the knife?
Well, typically the wounds are deep, and a lot of times they're through the tendons because there's a lot of force. It's the circumstances are not controlled like I see with a self-inflicted wound. They're typically uncontrolled. Somebody's trying to overpower somebody else, somebody's trying to overpower the knife, and there's a lot of force, and neither one of the people have control over the force that they're inserting, so the wounds tend to be much deeper and varied in depth. Some can be superficial, but typically, especially with grabbing a sharp object that's pulled away, they tend to be fairly deep.
All right.
Ezra came in police custody, so they brought her directly into a room, and the nurse came in and did initial evaluation. And then from there, I'll usually review the record or talk to the police in a circumstance like that and go in and see the patient. In a case where there's an alleged sexual assault, I usually have a nurse with me when I go in to get the history and get information, Because when a patient comes in under those circumstances or any circumstances, my job is first of all to intervene on life-threatening situations. And number two is to end up dealing, especially in a case like this, collection of evidences, which is where we bring in a SANE or a sexual assault nurse examiner to collect evidence. And then the third part is to deal with emotional or psychological trauma of the patient. So my job is to take care of this patient who's been through some type of event or ordeal, depending on whether it's a heart attack, a car accident, or alleged sexual assault. Basically, what she told me, she remembered she was driving to Eau Claire to meet Jason, and the next thing she knew, she was in the emergency department. But she really didn't remember what happened to her. She thought she might have been sexually assaulted, but wasn't sure.
Right. Did she ever mention Alexander or Alex Woodworth during your conversations with her?
No.
All right. So when you say they were patterned, what were they patterned in?
Well, there was a letter B and a letter O, and then kind of a triangle that looked like a Y. It almost looked like the word boy, and then there was a line across the top of it. And they were all patterned back towards where somebody would actually be in the orientation, where if you were writing on a piece of paper, they would be oriented towards you, which is typically what I would see when somebody did letters in their own arm. There was some abrasions on the back of her hand, more prominently on the right hand. There were abrasions on her right leg. And then when I examined her with the sexual assault nurse examiner, there were these linear abrasions in her right groin.
Now, as far as the injuries themselves, what type of treatment did those injuries require?
They were all very superficial. None of them required any repair or any sewing. They were just basically cleaned.
All right. And did you have to bandage any of them?
I don't think we bandaged any of them, just some antibiotic ointment.
All right.
Well, clearly, and from my medical record, I felt that they were self-inflicted. And that's why I wanted to have a mental health evaluation done on the patient.
Scott McRoberts, MCROBERTS.
What is your occupation?
I'm a patrol captain right now with the Dunn County Sheriff's Department.
And how long have you been employed in law enforcement?
27 years.
The following day, on March 24th of 2018, do you recall searching the ditch lines?
Yes.
And why were you doing that?
Just in the event there was other evidence missed during the evening search. We still had that area, an officer on scene for security during that time, and we just wanted to go back during the daylight to see if we could find any other items.
And as you proceeded up that road, do you know where the Don Sipple residence is?
Yes.
And can you just point that out with the red dot right over around that area? Was there less snow cover as you traveled up that road?
Yes, as you got past that area there.
And was a knife located then near the driveway to Sipple's daughter's residence?
Yes.
And did you observe that knife?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did you do?
Deputy Feeney had told me he could see a knife in that location. I messaged Sergeant Kurtzall's a picture of the knife since he was at the autopsy. They requested some measurements, so we provided some estimates on the length, width, type of knife it was without handling the knife.
And then Exhibit 441.
That's a measurement of the knife blade.
My name is Kevin Scott. My last name is spelled S-C-O-T-T.
And how are you employed, sir?
I am a DNA analyst at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison.
How long have you been employed as a DNA analyst for the State Crime Lab?
I have been there for about 6.5 years.
And were you working at the crime lab in the spring, summer, and into the fall and winter of 2018?
Yes, I was.
Give us an idea what DNA is.
Yeah, so DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is the genetic material that is present in all living organisms. It is the blueprint that codes for all structures and functions within our body, and we inherit DNA from our parents. Half of our DNA comes from our mother, and half comes from our father. So your DNA will be the same regardless of the source of where that DNA comes from. So the DNA in your blood will be the same as the DNA in your skin and the DNA in your mouth. So this allows us to make comparisons between different sources of DNA regardless of which bodily fluid it may come from. So two common methods that DNA is collected are by swabs or by cuttings. So a swabbing is essentially taking an oversized Q-tip and rubbing it against an item of evidence, attempting to transfer any DNA that might be on the item onto that swab. And then we use that swab for further analysis. In addition, we can, if it's like a fabric type material, we can just take a cutting out of that item and then process that cutting for DNA.
So if you have a live individual who you want to obtain a sample of their DNA, is that the most typical method of obtaining a sample is by using a buccal swab?
Yes, it is.
Right. If you have a deceased individual, like we did in this case with Mr. Woodworth, what is the typical method of trying to find a known standard from someone who is deceased?
We often use dried blood standards. So somebody's blood is taken and placed on a card and allowed to dry, and then we use that blood as a standard from that individual. So when we perform the statistical analysis, if we find that that profile is more rare than 1 in 7 trillion individuals, with 7 trillion being approximately 1,000 times the world's population, if it's more rare than 1 in 7 trillion, we will simply state that this person is the source of that DNA profile.
What can you tell us about that boot and what you did with that boot? Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from that swabbing or from that boot?
Yes, I was. So the swabbing of the reddish-brown staining on the side of the boot, I obtained a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
And did you do that from a swab, or did you have to actually take a cutting from that boot?
So the reddish-brown staining was a swab of the boot.
Okay.
In addition, I did take a swabbing and a cutting of the interior of the boot, attempting to obtain DNA from somebody who may have been wearing it. And in this cutting, I was able to determine a major female contributor profile, which is, again, that DNA profile from that one female individual who contributed the most DNA to the mixture. And I concluded that Ezra McCandless is the source of that major female contributor DNA.
All right, so to summarize, the area where you confirmed blood was Alexander Woodworth, and the interior was the defendant.
The interior major contributor, yes.
Yes, or swabbed on there.
It was another area of staining on the right thigh. It was higher up than that first area of staining.
So is that this area here?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So I, again, obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood from my swabbing. I then attempted to obtain a DNA profile, and I did obtain a mixture of DNA from at least 2 individuals. And that mixture included at least 1 male contributor. And then I was able to make a comparison to the entire mixture, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth and Ezra McCandless are both included as possible contributors to that mixture profile, with the probability of randomly selecting an unrelated individual that can be included as a possible contributor to that profile. It would be 1 in 63 trillion.
Which swabbing was 04?
Swabbing 04 was that area of staining closer to the joint of the knife, near the knob. That swabbing, I also had a positive result on our confirmatory blood test, and I obtained a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
And finally, swabbing 02, which is that the handle swabbing?
Yes, so swabbing 02 is the swabbing of the handle of the knife. I also performed the confirmatory test for blood on that swab, and that test was positive. So I identified blood from that 02 swabbing. I then performed our DNA analysis on the O2 swabbing, and I obtained a mixture of DNA from 2 individuals, which includes at least 1 male contributor. I was able to determine a major male contributor, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that major male contributor DNA. In addition, I was also able to determine a partial minor contributor from this profile, which is the profile from the lesser of the 2 contributors. And I found that that minor contributor profile is consistent with the profile from Ezra McCandless, and I concluded that Ezra McCandless is the source of that minor contributor DNA. Item B12 was a swab of a reddish-brown stain, reportedly from the interior rear driver's side door at marker 9.
All right, and this will be Exhibit 107, Counsel. All right, so we see marker 9 there. What can you tell us about the swab from marker 9?
So I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood from this swab. The B12 swab. I then attempted to obtain a DNA profile, and I developed a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA. So I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood, and I obtained a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
Marker 14, what can you tell us about that swabbing?
So I obtained a positive result for the possible presence of blood. I then attempted to obtain a DNA profile, and I did obtain a mixture of DNA from at least 2 individuals and at least 1 male. I was able to determine a major female contributor, which is that DNA profile from that 1 female individual who contributed the most DNA to the mixture. And I concluded that Ezra McCandless is the source of that major female contributor DNA.
What about the minor contributor?
And I was unable to make any comparisons to the minor component of that mixture.
So we see marker 15 here. What can you tell us about that?
So I sampled a portion of that reddish-brown stain for the possible presence of blood, and I obtained a positive result. Then attempted to obtain a DNA profile from that reddish-brown staining on the leaf, and I developed a male DNA profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that DNA.
Right.
Yes, so we received a number of items that were reportedly recovered from Ezra McCandless. One of those items was reportedly left-hand fingernail evidence, which is a couple of swabs reportedly from the left hand. Another item is the right-hand fingernail evidence.
Right. And did you do anything to test the items that, we'll start with the left-hand fingernail evidence from the defendant?
Yes, I did. I performed the presumptive test for the possible presence of blood, and that test was positive. I then attempted to obtain a DNA profile from that left-hand fingernail evidence, and I obtained a mixture of DNA from 2 individuals. One of those individuals contributed the most DNA, and I was able to determine a major female contributor, and I concluded that Ezra McCandless is the source of that major female contributor DNA. I was also able to determine a minor male contributor profile, and I concluded that Alexander Woodworth is the source of that minor male contributor DNA.
First name is Ryan, R-Y-A-N. Last name is Prock, P as in Paul, R-O-C-K.
How are you employed, sir?
I am currently employed by the City of Eau Claire Police Department.
And how long have you been employed by the City of Eau Claire Police Department?
I've been employed by them since 2010, so just about 9 years.
And prior to that, did you have employment in law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
I worked for the City of La Crosse in Wisconsin Police Department.
And how long were you employed by them?
I got hired in 2004 by them.
Right. And did you work continuously until you started in Eau Claire in 2010?
Yes, I did.
And do you have a current rank with the Eau Claire Police Department?
I am currently assigned to the Detective Division, and I'm a detective inside that division.
And how long have you had that assignment?
Since 2014.
At some point in time, the determination was made, and it was determined that this was a death investigation, involving Dunn County. Is that correct?
That is correct.
After that happened, did you continue to have involvement in that investigation?
Yes, I did.
And why is that?
Dunn County asked for my assistance with a few interviews, specifically with Ezra McCandless on the 24th, I believe it was, of March, due to the fact that I've spoken with her and have a rapport with her.
Did you have some involvement in the attempts to find Alex Woodworth on March 23rd and March 24th?
Yes, I did.
Can you just generally, we'll talk a little bit more about it in detail a little later. What generally did you do in the attempts to find Alex Woodworth?
On the 23rd, I went and spoke with Ezra at Mayo Health System to see if she had any idea or remembered anything more that could help direct us to where Alex and her vehicle were. I also went to Alex's house, spoke with his roommates. Then I also went down to Racy's coffee shop and spoke with the barista that was working to see if Alex had been in or if they knew the next time he was supposed to work so we could try to make contact with him then.
Okay. And then we were talking, and then Alex suggested we go somewhere to talk, and I said, okay, that seems okay.
Okay.
So, you know.
So, continue.
And then after that, we were talking stuff, and I was like, I really want to go to like a park and stuff, and I just remember I keep saying that, and then after that, my brain just starts to like
So,
fizzle.
all right, so you're at his house talking, you decide to go someplace to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you end up going?
I suggested we go to Owen Park, and I don't know if we actually went there or not, because I remember going to Owen Park, but I don't know if I actually got to Owen Park or not. That's the scary thing. And then I just kind of remember just trying to explain myself and stuff, and then it just kind of gets like fuzzy for me.
Okay.
I just feel like all I can feel is like anxiety and like pain and stuff.
Okay.
It almost feels like kind of like if somebody would have blindfolded you kind of feeling.
Okay. So then you get found in Menominee.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get to Menominee?
I don't know. I just kind of felt like I woke up and I was scared, so I was just walking down the road. I just remember sitting in a chair at the old man's house.
Okay.
And then he called the ambulance and stuff. And then they took me to the hospital, and I've been here since then. I had to get exams and stuff done. And all my clothes.
Did you guys crash a car?
I don't think I crashed my car.
I mean, if you did, I would like to know just so we can go find it. I mean, you're not in trouble.
I don't remember crashing a car at all.
Okay.
I think I really remember crashing a car because I've been in a few accidents.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't forget those.
I mean, it's the part that we're having, like, obviously we can't find Alex and we can't find your car, so it's a little concerning to us.
Yeah. I just remember being really scared and just being in pain.
What were you scared of?
Being hurt.
By who or what?
Alex.
Okay. By him doing what, though?
By him, like, harming me and making me want to do something he wanted.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
He's been upset at me a couple times when I would go over because I was kind of seeing Alex for a little while because I was very confused. And he would get kind of upset when I was too sensitive or in pain and stuff during those interactions.
Who was? Jason was or Alex was?
Alex.
Okay. Did Jason do something to Alex?
No.
Ezra McCandless. EZRAMCCANDLESS. So I proceeded to drive up this hill of sorts, and then I got stuck in the mud.
You've seen the pictures of your car stuck in the mud?
Yes.
Did your car ever move again while you were there? Now this is your car. Did you notice something next to your car by where you were stuck?
Yes, I noticed a large, what seemed to be military trailer.
At some point, did you go over by that trailer?
Yes.
Why?
It was a bit tall for me to look inside, but I kind of peeked at it to see if there might have been something. I stopped focusing on it and I decided to go sit, just kind of on the hitch of the trailer. As I was sitting there, he approached me from behind and he wrapped his arms around me. It was kind of a hug.
What happens after he gives you the hug?
After he gives me the hug, and I tense. I think he felt that because he let go after he held me for a while. And I think he could see that I was breathing. I was trying to breathe through some anxiety, and he suggested that maybe I should go lay down or look around in the car again.
All right. So you're feeling that he's referring to as an object. What else are you feeling at that point?
At that point, I'm not so sure how to really think about what was happening. I was a little confused because he hadn't come on to me earlier that day. I didn't think he was going to do this. I was starting to feel my anxiety come back full force.
Go ahead, I was
My
just
leg
asking again.
is between his knees at that point, gripping the seat. I decided then to knee him in the groin.
What happens when, well, you decided to knee him in the groin. Did you actually do it?
Yes.
What happens then?
He reacts and he drops the knife at that point.
When he drops the knife, what do?
Instantly, I grab the knife and I've used my arm to pull myself into the footwell. And that's when everything really starts to happen. What I start doing is defending myself. As Alex is grabbing me, I started stabbing him anywhere and everywhere I could. I didn't know what was happening. I just needed to get away. I just needed to get out of the car.
Were you consciously aiming for any particular place when you were stabbing him?
No, it was happening fast and it was anywhere and everywhere.
Do you have any memory of the order in which you stabbed him at all?
No.
Dr. Thomas, would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Lindsey, Lindsey, Thomas, Thomas.
Can you tell us what your profession is?
I'm a forensic pathologist.
Do you have any board certifications?
Yes, I'm board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
What year did you begin working as a forensic pathologist?
Well, I finished my fellowship in 1988, so 31 years.
I'm going to ask you about testifying. You've had a long career, so I'm just going to limit it to the past 10 years. In the past 10 years, have you testified in court regarding forensic pathology?
Yes.
And in those past 10 years, approximately how many times have you been called as a witness by the prosecution?
I think it's like 34 times, so it's about 60% of the time that I've testified has been for the prosecution.
How many times for the defense in a criminal case?
I think 6, so about 11% of the time.
Okay, well, those numbers don't add up to 100, so are there also civil cases?
Yes, so civil cases are like wrongful deaths or motor vehicle crashes, nursing home deaths, things like that. And that's the rest, like 30% of the cases.
First of all, what is the definition of homicide?
So, as forensic pathologists, we have 5 options for manner of death. It's natural, accident, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. And homicide is a term that we use when the death is at the hands of another. So, for example, we might use it if 2 people are out hunting and one inadvertently shoots the other person. We would consider that a homicide because it's death at the hands of another. Like sort of the flip side is motor vehicle crashes we consider accidents, even though the person may be charged with criminal vehicular homicide. So the point about our terminology for homicide is it doesn't translate into a legal term. It could be self-defense, it could be manslaughter, it could be murder, it could be any range of things. But from our perspective, it's just death at the hands of another person.
Slide number 12. This depicts sharp force injury number 12 to the scrotal sac, correct?
Yes.
And looking at this wound to the scrotal sac, it would have bled profusely, correct?
Yes, it looks like there's bleeding within the scrotum also.
And if we go to the next slide, slide 13, that injury correlates directly with the both underwear and pants in this case, correct?
Yes.
You also opined that the injury to the head could have contributed to his death?
Yes.
And that's as a result of bleeding in the subdural space, putting pressure on the brain?
Yes.
This wound was approximately, do you agree, about 1.5 inches above the right ear canal?
Yes.
And this injury actually went through the temporal bone, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree it takes a substantial amount of force to stab through a bone?
Yes.
And would you agree that the trauma caused by the force going through the temporal bone could result in dizziness and disequilibrium?
It certainly could, yes.
And you agree that this caused bleeding outside of the brain, right?
Yes.
And you also observed, as well as Dr. Mills, a subarachnoid hemorrhage in the right temporal lobe of the brain?
Yes.
And a subarachnoid hemorrhage can lead to permanent brain death or damage, correct?
Yes.
Finally, you opined that the stab wounds to the lungs could have contributed to his death as well?
Yes.
And I don't believe your report indicated which wounds those are, but I believe, based on your testimony today, that was sharp force injury number 8, is that right?
Yes.
And this stab wound was actually quite deep at 3 3/8 inches in depth, correct?
Yes.
And if I told you that the blade of the knife used in this case was approximately 3.5 inches, the depth of this wound was approximately the entire length of the blade.
Yes. Yes.
So Alex sustained injuries to both his left and right lungs that could have contributed to his death, in addition to the neck, scrotal sac, and head wound into the brain.
Yes.
With the discussion of what's not at issue in a case. And ladies and gentlemen, there's no question in this case, there's no doubt at all, that the defendant caused Alex's death. The defendant killed Alex Woodworth on March 22nd, 2018, when she repeatedly stabbed him. It's not about whether the defendant killed Alex Woodworth, and it's not about whether the defendant intended to. It's whether you believe the defendant's story. The physical evidence tells us the defendant did this intentionally, that she did this not in self-defense, and that the defendant is guilty. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you consider all of the evidence in this case, it is clear. It is clear beyond a reasonable doubt. It is clear beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant sitting there is guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. It's time to tell the defendant, no more lies. You're not going to get away with just one more lie. Make her take responsibility for Alex's death on March 22nd. Find her guilty.
This is a case about self-defense. That's what this case is about. It's not about Ezra's relationships with other men. It's not about Jason Mengel. It's not about the missing witness that you never heard from, John Hansen. It's not about whether she's posted racy photos of herself. It's not about all the drama going on at coffee shops in Eau Claire. This is about Ezra and Alex. About what happens to the brain under attack, right?
the defense circuitry and how the amygdala takes over and it's the reflexes and habit, but that's because of the stressor. That's the stressor that happens. She had that fear. She had that belief. That's consistent with the evidence. To start thinking at some point, and not initially, right? We understand she went to his house, she wasn't afraid of him on the 22nd. She got in the car, she wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of him until the knife came out and the words attached to the knife she started to hear. And that's when this stuff starts flooding into her mind. A belief may be reasonable even though mistaken. The reasonableness of Ezra's beliefs must be determined from the standpoint of her at the time of her acts and not from the viewpoint of the jury now. A person of ordinary intelligence and prudence would have believed in the position of Ezra McCandless at the time of the alleged offense. That's the standard, right? So let's look at it. Under these circumstances at that time. The judges said you can consider that in deciding the reasonableness of her beliefs. And what you heard from the experts and was uncontested is that's who she is. Under those circumstances at that time, we're talking about a 20-year-old woman with PTSD. Whether she had it in that moment, I guess I can't exactly say, but childhood onset trauma, he does say. Aspects of depersonalization, he does say. You can consider that in deciding a person under those circumstances. What would their reasonable belief be? You only get one chance to do your duty. So go back there. Think about the case. Use care, caution, rationale. Remember what I told you about how you can use the evidence so that when you leave, you hand in that verdict form, that one verdict form that says not guilty. And one of you amongst you gets to take and sign that form and submit it to the judge.
Mr. McCandless, please rise. We, the jury, find the defendant, Ezra J. McCandless, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide as charged in the information. And the answer to the special verdict question is yes, use a dangerous weapon. Again, you may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, is this your verdict? All right, I'm going to do what's called polling the jury, and I'm going to ask each of you if this is your verdict. And I'm going to ask you by your juror number. Juror number 30, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 20, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 67, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 2, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 36, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 56, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 73, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 90, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 133, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 135, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 98, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror number 64, is this your verdict?
Yes.